Let's go next to Senator Barack Obama.
Thank you very much, Ray, and I appreciate the Brookings Institute for hosting this meeting. Watching Ray crack the whip, I'm going to make sure that I go through these pretty quick. You know, I think that there's a tendency in forums like this, but I think also nationally, for us to think of the cities as something separate and apart, sort of outliers from the rest of the body republic, sort of anomalous in some sense. But I think that it's fair to say that what's going on in the cities, particularly when we start thinking about city-states and regionalism, mirrors largely what's happening throughout the country. And so when we start thinking about whether the urban revival is real or not, I think what we're really asking is how real is the revival of the American economy, and what shape is it taking, and who's benefiting from that and who's being left behind. If you look at the particular constituencies in the city, and I think Ray aptly described the district that I represent, it's a district that includes some very strong, not only middle class, but upper middle class areas like Hyde Park in and around the University of Chicago. It also includes some of the poorest communities in the country in areas like Englewood. And if you look at these communities, I think it's fair to say that the growth in the overall economy, the economic movement that we're in the midst of right now, has redounded to the benefit of the cities. I think that's undeniable, as Bruce mentioned. Job growth is up, housing starts are up, tax receipts are up. You know, the flush economy has a visible effect in my district, where you see, for example, working class people having marginally better success finding jobs or finding new jobs or maybe getting a small pay increase. I think the increase in tax receipts has a tremendous effect in the city because it does two things. One, it means that it buys some goodies, and I'm sure Mayor Norquist will have something to say about this, but it's nice having money in the coffers. You can do things that you had planned on for a long time but just didn't have the money to do it and didn't want to raise taxes for it. The second thing, I think, just as importantly, it buys a measure of labor peace. In Chicago, for example, there's been a lot of talk that the schools are bouncing back. Mr. Paul Vallis and the reconstituted board there has been making a major push to reform education. Part of the reason that they've been able to make some significant progress, at least administratively and managerially, is the fact that they've been able to avoid strikes with the teachers union. And I think that the same is true for a lot of the other city services. That brings a measure of stability to the city, and it means that it becomes a little easier to manage the city. Another area where you see very real change, and I think all the panelists here have remarked on this a little bit, is that there is very real housing development in previously neglected areas within the city, particularly where they have some sort of hub or anchor, like a university, or in the case of in Chicago, also the United Center, the new gymnasium that was built for the Chicago Bulls. If there's a major hospital, particularly a teaching hospital, those kinds of hubs, you're starting to see significant expansion in terms of sort of affordable housing. And I qualify that because I think a lot of times when we talk about affordable housing in this context, we're talking about housing that costs $150,000 to $170,000 a year. That's important because it's bringing back the teacher, the nurse, the bus driver into these areas. It gives them an opportunity to actually live and work in these areas and feel confident about the direction that the community is going in. But this is not very low income housing. And I think one of the issues that still has to be confronted is, particularly in a place like Chicago, what are we going to do with respect to very low income persons, which brings me, I think, to the part that's not real about the economic revival in the cities. And that is the continuing patterns of inequality that permeate not just Chicago, but New York City and other areas, I think is the biggest challenge, as Jeremy indicated, to sustaining this recovery. Some of this inequality is magnified by the land use patterns that mean an explosion of job growth in the suburbs and the relative decline in job growth in the cities. But that same divide between haves and have-nots is also mirrored within the city, where you've got information-age professionals and downtowns doing very well, and neighborhoods that don't have these new-age skills continuing to decline and deteriorate and erode. This spatial mismatch between job growth and the people who are unemployed, and also the skills mismatch that goes with it, means that, for example, in Chicago, for every 4 entry-level workers seeking a job, you have only 1 entry-level job. And this is actually in the region as a whole. When you start looking at neighborhoods like the ones I represent, the ratios start becoming 1 entry-level job for every 25 entry-level workers. And when you start talking about entry-level jobs that actually pay a living wage, where you might be able to support a family, now you're looking at 1 entry-level job for every 35 to 40 entry-level workers. So the whole issue of building skills, human capital development, and improving the public education system and the workforce development system in these areas is absolutely vital if we're going to deal with these issues of inequality. I'll just end with one quick remark about the schools, and then I think we can return to some of these other issues later. One of the biggest impediments to growth, in addition to some of the points that Jeremy raised, is the fact that it's very hard for working class and middle class folks to send their kids to public schools in the city. And that has not changed despite the significant administrative improvements that have been made in the Chicago public schools. Right now we've got basically 1 out of 10 students graduating being able to read at the national norm in Chicago. And that's after reform. And in that context, it is extraordinarily difficult to convince people to invest and businesses to invest in these communities in a sustained sort of way. And now some of that is exacerbated by an extraordinarily inequitable system of public education finance, something that has to be dealt with at the state level. Some of it also has to do with a issue of civic engagement by parents and teachers and community. But unless we, I think, fundamentally restructure the public schools, and I'll have some thoughts about that maybe during the discussion, it's going to be very difficult for us to sustain whatever progress has been made over the last several years.